No training would be complete without a little section on discipline and guidance. We're going to talk a little bit about typical behaviors in an early education program. There's 4 typical behaviors that every early education program experiences each and every day. While it may not be possible to eliminate these typical behaviors, we can work to reduce them to a bare minimum. It is important that early educators are reminded that children are learning and growing. They will make mistakes, and mistakes are opportunities to teach. Rather than stereotyping the child for a typical behavior, we must understand that the child needs guidance, the child needs understanding. First thing right here is we've got to be proactive. Early educators must be one step ahead of the children in their care. Active supervision requires caregivers to anticipate behaviors, being aware of emotional triggers that will send the child into a high range of emotions. Active calming techniques must be ready at a moment's notice to engage and redirect children who may be falling into that black hole of disruptive behavior. Proactively distracting the child with a sensory-related activity that moves their mind away from the fight or flight stage that they are heading into. Why do children misbehave? Well, first off, misbehave is a word that is completely misunderstood. Children are always in one of 2 different states. They are either calling for love or they are giving love. When a child is not meeting an expectation, they are labeled as misbehaviors, when in fact they're actually calling for love. There is an unmet need that is going on in that child's life or that child's experience at the time. Acting out is simply a cry for help. This is the child's way of saying, I don't understand and I don't feel safe. We constantly tell children to express themselves, but when they do express themselves, we tell them that they are misbehaving. Again, I've said this probably 4 times on this DVD already. Behavior is an opportunity to teach. Rather than getting frustrated with the child, we should be thanking them. They are creating opportunities for us. The misbehaved child is giving us this incredible opportunity. The child is giving us the opportunity to teach, the opportunity to make a huge difference in their life. And also, let's talk about the difference between teaching and coaching. Remember when you were a child and you first started playing a sport, whether it was baseball or softball, soccer, football, all of these were popular with all of us at an early age. When you joined the team, the coach did not give you one simple lesson on how to play the game and then expect you to master the skills. The coach started with an assessment. What do you know? What do you need to know? What are your current skills? What can be improved? The coach started with the basics. The first time you stepped up to the plate, no one expected you to hit that home run. The coach worked with you on where to stand, how to hold the bat, techniques for keeping your eye on the ball, and when was the appropriate time to swing. You practice this over and over, day after day, night after night. And once you mastered the basics, the coach then took you to the next skill. And then again, you practiced. It took you years to gain the skills and the confidence needed to play the game. The same is true for behavior. You must take it one skill at a time. Practice each of these skills 2,000 times in context before it is understood and mastered. Then you move on to the next skill. You must understand that you are teaching these skills as the child is growing and they're developing. The child is being exposed to an outside world that has many, many questions, several behaviors and items that the child is exposed to are confusing and they don't understand it. People are coming in and out of their life. Why is there so much change? Where is the consistency that the child is desperately needing during this confusing time? Remember that discipline comes from the word disciple. You are mentoring and you are coaching exactly what the child needs. You cannot connect or you cannot expect overnight success. And just like that coach that you had when you were starting your sporting career, you never give up on your athletes. All right, let's kind of talk about some of our common behaviors in early childhood education. Of course, temper tantrums. We've all had the temper tantrum. The child that has an emotional outburst, he starts kicking, he starts screaming, flipping over chairs, ripping down bulletin boards. That child is very common in all of our programs. I want you to think about a time that you had a child that was throwing a temper tantrum. During that temper tantrum, what were you thinking and what were you feeling? You were probably feeling confused. You were lost. You were frustrated. You were scared. You were scared that he was going to hurt himself. You were scared that he was going to hurt other children. He was going to hurt you. There were a lot of different feelings going through your body during that temper tantrum. Now, I want you to also keep in mind, we've talked in this DVD about children have an innate ability to get us to feel what they're feeling. So all of these emotions that are going through your body while that child is throwing that temper tantrum, everything that you're feeling is exactly what that child is feeling. The number one thing that we got to keep in mind during a temper tantrum is that the child doesn't feel safe. They are trying to express themselves in the only way that they know possible. They don't know how to express what they need in an appropriate way. Now, we talked about being in the executive state. And when we reach a high level of emotions or we hit a trigger, we downshift it to our fight or flight. That's what the temper tantrum is. The temper tantrum is the fight or flight mode. You have to engage the child with active calming techniques before you can address the issue of the temper tantrum. They need to feel calm, they need to feel safe, they need to feel nurtured, and they need to feel loved before you can have any type of conversation. Once you practice active calming, you are safe, you are loved, and I'm here to protect you. Once you get the child back to the executive state, then you can talk about whatever need that needs to be met. Okay? Now, this goes back to what we just mentioned. The best way to deal with temper tantrum is to be proactive to the behavior, especially if the child is throwing a tantrum because they want something. We have to teach them the appropriate way to ask what they want, and that there's a time and a place to get what they want. They may not always be satisfied. That's where compromise comes in. Now, talking back is a funny one to me. And I hear a lot of early educators talk, about, oh, I got these kids that always talk back. Well, I mean, didn't we train them to do that? We're always talking about asking children open-ended questions. We want children to ask why. We want children to discover. We want children to understand. What is the difference between having a conversation with a child versus an argument with a child? Well, the big difference between the two is going to be, tone of voice and body language. That's what turns a conversation into an argument. So when we talk about a child talking back, a lot of it is just a conversation where the child is calling for love, they're needing understanding, but the adult is the one that takes it in a disrespectful manner, and the adult is usually the one that changes their body language and their tone first. So, the talking back scenario is one where we have to see ourselves as the role model, and we have to really model to that child self-control and tone and keep it a conversation rather than an argument or talking back. Now, biting, of course, we all experience this. It's very typical in our early education world. Toddlers, 2-year olds. You've got to understand that there's 5 different reasons why children bite. Biting could be due to curiosity. It could be due to pain. It could be aggression. It could be frustration. There's several different reasons why children bite. The first thing you've got to do is you've got to understand the reasoning behind the biting and focus on that first. If it is a need for attention, the child is trying to get your attention, we've got to teach them the appropriate way to get your attention rather than biting one of their friends. If it's curiosity, they're curious about the smell of another child, the texture of their hair, the texture of their skin. This is where your sensory-based activities are going to be very important. Remember, in our child growth and development classes, the first way children learn to explore is by placing things in their mouth. So when a child is curious about another child, it is their natural instinct to place it in their mouth, or the curious item in the mouth. So keep that in mind right there. Aggression and frustration, we talk about active calming. We've got to teach the child self-regulation. All right, that's a pretty easy one right there. Now, the biggest thing with biting is that the adult is not the one that's bitten in most situations. It's another child. So for an adult to tell the biter, biting hurts, your friends don't like it when you bite them. How do we know? We don't know what it felt like to get bit. We don't know if the friend liked it or not. We don't even know if the other kid is a friend. So the biggest thing with biting is empowering the victim, all right? Whoever was bitten, all right? First, rule number 1, victim first, aggressor second. All right, victim first, aggressor second. So when you've got a situation where 2 children are playing and one child bites another child, you go to the victim first. All right, something's wrong. You seem upset. You're holding your arm and you're crying. What happened? And the other child's going to say, oh, Johnny bit me. Oh, well, how did that make you feel? Let's go ahead and take care of the victim, get them cleaned off, give them some first aid, and you tell the biter, I'll be with you in just a moment. Now, what you're going to see is that the biter is going to be all up in your business because they're trying to get your attention. They're like, hey, I just bit someone. Pay attention to me. Victim first, biter second. And then you want to empower that victim. Sarah, okay, you tell Johnny. Now, first off, Sarah, match my voice. You tell Johnny, Johnny, I don't like it when you bite me. Biting hurts. And make sure that Sarah matches your voice. Make sure that it's assertive, not aggressive. It needs to be assertive. And Sarah has to be the one to tell Johnny, I don't like it when you bite me. Biting hurts. She was the victim, all right? Johnny's going to understand the empathy more from the victim than from the caregiver. All right. And you look at Johnny and you tell Johnny, I'm here to make sure that you listen to what Sarah has to say. All right. That's true. I mean, especially in biting, because biting, is surrounded by so many mysteries and so many misunderstandings that the empowerment of the victim is critical in a biting situation. all right, more so than any others. But empowering your victim is going to be important in all of your behaviors that you have in your early childhood classroom. Now, tattling and whining, again, a very misunderstood behavior right here. This is definitely a form of communication. The child has it's more about a tone of voice than it is a behavior. Some adult influence in that child's life has encouraged them to be a tattler or a whiner. All right. So in a situation where you've got a tattler or a whining, this is very simple. You just want to go in and you want to role model appropriate tones, appropriate ways to get attention. And, and if the child is telling you something that you don't already know, no, Johnny's climbing on the table again, and if you don't know that Johnny's climbing on the table, rather than getting upset with the kid, you should be thanking them. All right. Now, if they're just saying something to hear their voice, that could be tattling or whining. But again, focus on the conversation piece. All right. Next thing I want to do is I kind of want to talk about one of my favorite, topics, and we've discussed this before, but talking about common behaviors in early childhood programs. Let's kind of talk about the difference between boys and girls. And you do have a handout on your CD-ROM that you can print off, and this is a lot of fun right here. Understanding how boys and girls develop differently and how their brains develop differently, it really helps the early education teacher out there, see what's going on in the classroom and to be proactive, anticipate behaviors. Now, we got to start off with pre-birth. What's going on before the child is actually born. Once the woman becomes pregnant and, the fetus is developed, it develops testosterone if it's going to be a boy. It develops estrogen if it's going to be a girl. At that point in time, the male fetus becomes immune to estrogen. The female fetus becomes immune to testosterone. Now, during the first 6 weeks, the brain has the same structure. All right. It's after 6 weeks that things start to change. All right. Now, with a male fetus, it's generally more active. It's more restless, where a female fetus is very kind of calm. And this kind of reminds me of back when we were growing up. And our grandma used to take your wedding ring and put it on a string and hold it over your belly. If it moved around in circles, you were having a boy. If it moved back and forth, you were having a girl. And that had to do with the activity level of the fetus. Those grandmas, they had all the great stuff, right? And then you kind of see on here, well, the male cortex develops slower. The brain is less lateral than the female brain. It's less flexible. There's greater idling in the brainstem. And you're like, what in the world does all that mean? And how does it affect me in my early education program? Well, when you have a brain that the cortex develops slower, it's more lateral, it's less flexible, there's greater idling in the brainstem. That means that the brain is better at withstanding trauma, all right? Where when you look over at the female side, you see that the cortex develops faster, it's less lateral, it's more flexible. That means that the brain is better at thinking and reasoning skills. And if we look at a boy and a girl, I think all of y'all would agree with me that typically boys are better at withstanding trauma, girls are better at thinking and reasoning. I forgot to throw my little disclaimer out there, folks. We're talking about the average child here. We're not talking about your child, because we all know that your child is special. We're talking about the average child that's out there. Now, with an infant, a boy infant, they prefer mechanical and structural toys, where the girl likes the soft and cuddle toys. They love the sensation on the skin, where guys, not so much. A boy infant will look at an object for a shorter but more active period of time, where a girl will look at an object for longer periods but less active. So, for example, with an infant boy, if you show them a toy, they're going to look at it, yep, got it, let's move on. Where a girl is going to look at the toy, oh yeah, there's a toy, let me analyze it, let me take a good look at it. She's really going to focus on it. Guys, look at it, got it, move on. All right. A boy will gaze at its mother half as long as a girl does, where the girl just loves to stare at mommy. Sometimes I hear mothers say, I just don't know what's wrong. My daughter loves me so much, and my boy will barely look at me. All right, it's okay, mom. Don't worry about it. That's just how the boy brain is. All right. Again, motor activity is more vigorous with the boys. Girls are a lot calmer right there. At 1 week of age, a girl infant is able to distinguish a cry. They are able to distinguish that's another human crying, where to a boy, it's just noise. All right. So again, the hearing is very detailed on the female side. Same thing with looking at faces. At 4 months of age, you can hold up a picture of a face, and a female will be able to recognize that that is a human face, where the boy is just an object. All right. Guys are more sensitive to salty foods. Girls are sensitive to bitter taste. Girls prefer sweets. We know that. Guys, less sensation, less sensitive to sensation on the physical skin. The boys normally don't like it when you hold them and caress them and stroke them. Girls, they love it. All right. Boys are more easily angered. Girls are more easily saddened. All right. So if I was doing a training and there were some guys in there and there were some girls in there, and if I said something offensive, the guys are going to get really angry with me. Hey, Tim, let's take this outside. Where the girls, they're going to get sad. And then 6 years later, they're going to come up to me and say, hey, remember 6 years ago I came to your training and you said something really offensive that made me so sad. So again, they kind of hang on to that. Boys are better at narrow vision. All right, so again, they see what is right in front of them. Girls are better at peripheral vision, which is the vision around. All right, this is really interesting right here. I love this. Boys are superior to the blue end of the color spectrum, where girls are superior to the red end of the color spectrum. That's why when you go to Walmart to buy baby clothes, boy clothes are normally blue, girl clothes are normally pink. And this is the reason why. Now, here's something else that's very interesting about the color spectrum is that when children are first born, they can only see black and white. The very first color that we are able to recognize is red. All right, so, and then from there we develop, different colors. So since a girl is superior to the red end of the color spectrum, who's going to see colors first? The girl. So that's why as we progress through development, especially with cognitive skills, girls are always one step ahead of boys. And it starts right here with the color spectrum. All right. Girls, again, very in tune to sensory input. Here's something that's interesting. Boys can see better out of their left eye, where girls have equal vision out of both eyes. So if you're trying to show your baby boy something and you really want to get his attention, you stand or you sit to the left side of the child. Okay? For a girl, it doesn't matter right there. Girls very bothered by loud noises, loud sudden noises, where typically the boy could care less. And again, the girl is comforted by soft cooing words and singing, not so much with the guys. Also, just throw this out there that you have a 25% higher mortality rate with boys than you do girls, especially in a SIDS situation. Now, once the child gets into preschool, girls normally speak first, and then a boy will speak after the girl. 99% of speech, you should be able to understand a girl by the age of 3. 99% of speech is not understood by a boy until the age of 4. Once the child is able to walk and explore, boys show a greater interest in exploring. Girls, even after they master standing and walking, they kind of stay in one place right there. By the age of 3, boys start to lose their baby fat and start to build muscle. Girls don't lose baby fat and build muscle until the average age of 4. And then, of course, I always say at the age of 35, we get it all back. All right, girls are better at multitasking. Boys, not so good at multitasking. Now, remember I told you earlier that boys can see better out of their left eye? They hear better out of their right ear. Uh-oh, that's kind of weird. Where, again, girls have equal hearing out of both sides. Boys are better at auditory memory. You can tell them something, they remember it. Girls are better at visual memory. You need to show them, and they will remember it. Boys are also more likely to ignore voices, especially their parents. And of course, boys are more physically impulsive. Now, when we get to the pre-K part, boys are more one-directional, less crosstalk, and boys are typically more focused, all right? Where, again, girls, more crosstalk. A girl, you could have a group of girls that are standing around. You could have 7 different conversations going on at one time. All of them are going to be engaged in all 7 conversations. Not so much with the guys. Guys, 1 conversation at a time. All right. Boys occupy more space on the playground. Girls will congregate in small groups. As early as age 2, girls will form social cliques. All right. Again, playground activities with the boys involve a lot of running, rough housing, vigorous and competitive games. And then, like I said, the girls, they form their little social cliques. When children play in block centers, you're going to see that the boy will build the tall, high structures, and then the girl will build the low and long structures. And then, of course, once the boy builds it, the next thing he wants to do is knock it over, where the girl wants to keep it built for a little while. Girls love it when a newcomer comes into the group. They immediately run up to the individual to introduce themselves. Boys will ignore a newcomer until that person shows their worthiness. All right. So if a new kid comes into the classroom, the girl's immediately going to run up to him, introduce herself, wants to show the new kid around. The boy will ignore the new kid. Oh, look, there's a new kid. Who cares? Oh, wait, he's got a Spider-Man in his back pocket. So he's got to prove his worthiness. Again, when boys tell stories, they are full of excitement. They're full of action. They ignore feelings. It's just all about the action and excitement and explosions and all of this stuff. Where girls, when they tell stories, they're very emotionally based. They talk about feelings. They talk about love, all of that type of stuff. All right. Boys, their interest is in objects and things. Girls, your interest is in people and relationships. So if you were to ask a boy and a girl or a man and a woman to define their success in life, a guy is going to say, well, I own 3 houses, I've got a boat, I've got 2 cars, and a jet ski. And if you ask a girl to find your success in life, she's going to say, oh, I got 723 friends on Facebook. All right? When saying goodbye to mom, it takes a boy about 30 seconds. Again, he's focused, he's determined. Bye, mom, gotta go. All right? A girl, 3 times longer. It takes her approximately 90 seconds to say goodbye to mom. Now, you also got to remember that the female is a lot more emotionally based, and when you've got a young girl saying goodbye to her mother, who is also a girl, you just got a lot of emotions going on right there. So, as an early educator, here's the best idea. Mom drops off the boys, dad drops off the girls, we can get on with the classroom. Just kidding, but it's true, right? When playing in the home center or dramatic play, boys like to use dolls for attack weapons and warfare, where again, the girls will use it to play out domestic scenes. Both boys and girls prefer to play with their own gender. Boys play with the boys, girls play with the girls. Remember, girls have cooties, so we got to stay away from y'all, for a few years. Boys will express their emotions through actions. Girls express their emotions through words. Keep that in mind when you're dealing with some of the typical behaviors that we've talked about. All right? And again, girls, very sensitive to social and personal contacts. Boys have a smaller attention span than girls. Girls have a greater attention span. So when you're doing your circle time, when you're doing your small group activities, you got to keep those boys engaged. You're going to lose them really, really quick if you don't. All right. Once the child starts reading, a girl shows a greater interest in reading. They read sooner, and then they maintain an interest in reading. Boys learn better in bright light. Girls learn better in low light. When giving a test, boys prefer to circle answers. Girls prefer for something to be read out loud, and then they answer it from that. Typically, boys are better at math. Girls are better at grammar and vocabulary. Boys are better at three-dimensional reasoning. Boys are more rule-bound than girls. Girls are less rule-bound. Sometimes people say, "Oh, Tim, it's about it." Boys are more willing to follow a rule. Doesn't mean we like it, but we're rule followers. Girls, if a girl does not like a rule, what do? They try to manipulate it, and they change it. That's what they do. They're very good at problem solving. Now, in conclusion, whenever you put this all together, especially if you were kind of taking notes or if you were looking at the handout, you're going to see a lot of common items on each side of the page. You can kind of see the conclusion there that 95% of all hyperactive children are boys. They're more physically impulsive, all right? They're more on the go. It makes sense right there. All right, and of course, boys are better at separating emotion from reason. Girls, not so much. All right, so quick little lesson right there on how boys and girls learn different. I hope you enjoyed that. It's always one of the eye openers that your light bulb goes off, and now you kind of understand. So there you go.